Hello everyone, and welcome to Fertile Ground with Mike and Coach. My name is Mike Cornell, and I'm alongside Coach Ron Lathey. Have you ever heard the term that something has just plain gone to the dogs? Well, what does that mean, and what does the Bible have to say about that? And that's going to be a fun discussion for us here today, Coach.
Yeah.
And as we get started, we have three things we would like for you to think about and to consider. And the first one is this: how long should we persist in prayer if God doesn't seem to be answering? And I know there's some of you out there that would like to hear the answer to that. And if you're a note taker, this is a really good spot to grab your Bible, grab a pen, grab a piece of paper, and follow right along with us here today. Second of all, if Christ died for all, why are only some saved? And then finally, what would you say if a person tells you, I do not have enough faith to come to Jesus? And today we continue with the International Sunday School series that we follow from week to week. And Coach, here we go. Last week, the title of our study was Faith of an Anointer, and we were actually in the book of Luke. This week, the title of our study is Faith of a Canaanite, and we're going to be in the book of Matthew, and we're going to be in chapter 15 and working our way from verses 21 to 28. And Coach, could you just kind of set the stage for us as we get started here today?
Yes, Faith of a Canaanite. We're still on the faith kick, as we have been for quite some time, but we're going to see this is just a little different, this lesson here. And we're, as you said, in the book of Matthew. We know that Matthew was actually his given name was Levi, and he was a tax collector of all things for the Romans. And for that, because he was had gotten into being a tax collector, he was, not very well thought of. So most tax collectors won't, because first of all, the Jewish people felt they were traitors to their own people, and then also many of them found out that they could get pretty rich by collecting taxes if they either are overcharged or put some money in the pockets, So he didn't start off with a very good reputation to begin with. But anyway, we find out that Matthew became a disciple of Christ, and Matthew is one that, as we said, is starting out. He didn't write the first book of the New Testament, but his leads off the pack anyway in the Bible. So we know that his gospel was actually intended to be written to the Jews. Yeah. He focused on writing to them. So we see here that he had some things that where he was the only one that recorded certain things that none of the other gospels did. So he put some things in there that were not in the other gospels. We're up to now, we're going to look at the 15th chapter of Matthew in our lesson today. And what we see here around the 15th chapter is the tide is beginning to turn against Jesus. Even his own people are not believing as far as being the Messiah. They are not trusting like they were to begin with. A lot of the newness was worn off. And because I think they were still looking for somebody coming in as almost like a warrior to fight for them and get the Romans out and get Israel set back into the Jewish hands. So that's probably part of it. And then, of course, he was saying things about the Messiahship that was upsetting all the religious leaders and all those people. So he started to get some pushback on his ministry and on his teachings. So even his disciples, hadn't really gotten sold on him being the Messiah. I don't think, they'd seen the miracles, they'd listened to his teaching, but there was just something that they weren't, ready to just go head first and follow him. So that says too that they didn't really understand his teaching. And no matter how he would try to present it, they didn't either accept it or just didn't understand it. And in chapter 15, we're going to see that Jesus is challenging, the teachings of the the religious leaders at that time. And he, as he sometimes did, he's now kind of leaving and ending his Galilee ministry. And he needs some quiet time. He needs to get away from things a little bit. So he takes his disciples and they head north up to what is now Lebanon, and actually left the Jewish country itself, Israel, and went up there. Basically, we can only guess maybe why he went, but I'm sure part of it just to get away from all the criticism and everything that he's going through, and also he knows that things are building to some of the people have asked him to be, if he's going to be king, of Israel, and the religious leaders are seeing how famous he's getting and getting big crowds still, and so they're giving him a lot of heartache, and so he just needs some time to himself and maybe even to slow things down a little bit, because he knows what's the right timing is when what his father wants him to do, and right now is not that time. So he's kind of, I think, backing off a little bit just to give the people and the leaders, religious leaders, some space to cool down a little bit, and he's trying to get things quiet on a pace where he will be going to the cross at the time that he picks, not that they pick.
Yeah, we're going to find out. He's really kind of stretching the boundaries here a little bit, and we'll talk a little more about that. But our writer today, Coach, is Matthew. And Matthew, like the other participants of the four Gospels, is a real interesting person in the way they present their perspective of Christ here on this earth. And Matthew really refers back to the Old Testament more than any of the other Gospels do. And you were talking about some things that Matthew mentions that the others don't. It seems like most of those usually pertain to Gentiles.
Yeah.
And which is really, really interesting, because that's the direction our story is going to go today as we get started here with the Canaanite woman.
Yeah.
And that takes us to the very first section here, Coach. And we're going to see here in verses 21 through 24 a mother's plea. And we'll learn more about that as we go along here. So Matthew chapter 15, looking at verse 21, and God's word says this: leaving that place, Jesus withdrew to the region of Tyre and Sidon. So after confronting the Pharisees and the teachers of the law about inner cleanliness, which seemed like a full-time job for him, Jesus retreated with his disciples to this region here of Tyre and Sidon that the scripture actually mentions.
Right. Yeah, as we said, he got completely out of Jewish territory. Yeah. And again, one of the reasons I think he went there was he didn't want any Jewish people following him. He wanted to get away, as we talked about. And we know that Tyre and Sidon, two cities that you mentioned, as I said, they were north of Galilee. One of them was about 50 miles above where the Galilee area is, and the other one was about 25 miles further. But they were pretty wealthy cities because they were on this trade route between Damascus, Syria, and Egypt. So they were well-known cities at that time. Plus, they were on the coastline of the Mediterranean Sea. So they had, places where people could get on ships and sail away from there, send goods and trade and so forth. So it was a busy city, Tyre especially. And as I said, it's today's where Lebanon is located today. And we find out that this particular area here, it was originally given to one of the tribes of Israel, the tribe of Asher, as their part of the promised land. But as often happened, when God told them to take over the land, they were to go ahead and pretty much kill these Canaanites, is what they were called. Right. And but the tribe of Asher didn't do that. They didn't really get rid of the people. They didn't have to kill them, but they had to take over the land and get rid of the people, is what God wanted them to do. and they didn't do that. So because of that, they actually settled in with them. And of course, once you settle in with a group, then you start mixing with them, and it caused great problems because of that. So what we find out here is that the Old Testament prophets often condemned, this kind of a practice when the Israelites, and this wasn't any exception. And Jesus even went so far as to put a curse on them. And when he was cursing some of the cities, even in the Galilee area, like Capernaum was one, and there was a couple others. Bethsaida was one of them that he mentioned, and Chorazin was another one. And Jesus actually cursed these cities, and as part of that curse, they were actually destroyed. Some by an earthquake, some by war and everything. So they're for a long time, nobody even knew where they were until archaeologists were able to find them again. So Tyre and Sidon were cursed by God also. And Tyre was kind of another name for evil. When in the Bible, to make reference to any people that were like that, often the name Tyre came up as an example. So that's where Jesus is heading, and he's going to run into a Canaanite woman there when he gets to that area.
Well, this is the first time, Coach, in Jesus' earthly ministry that he really extended out past the boundaries of Jewish influence.
Right.
And it's relevant here because he's sort of making a statement that, the gospel message, what he came for, is really going to be for everybody.
Right.
And a matter of fact, in Isaiah chapter 49, verse 6, and all of these folks would have known this. Any good little Jewish boy or good little Jewish girl would have known this verse. In verse 49:6 talks about centuries earlier, Isaiah made this clear by saying that Israel was to be the light to the Gentiles.
Right.
But the key to this thing is timing. Mm-hmm. It wasn't quite yet time for Jesus to take the gospel message to the Gentiles, because he wanted to first allow the Jews to get it.
Right.
And of course, that was like beating them over the head, getting it. But it was to go to the Jews first, and then to the Greeks, or the Gentiles as we know it. And so him kind of extending out past into Gentile territory here a little bit is sort of just kind of laying the hint out there that, look, this isn't going to be just for the Jews.
Right. And that actually is a fulfillment of prophecy.
Right.
It was set up that way that he would first go to the Jews, because they were the ones that were given, the promised land, given the blessings, were God's chosen people. And they were, as you said, to take that message to the rest of the world, but they failed miserably in a lot of ways. So, but still, Jesus is keeping his part of the prophecy to the Jews first, and then to the Greek after that.
All right, let's go to verse 22. A Canaanite woman from that vicinity came to him, crying out, "Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me. My daughter is demon-possessed and suffering terribly." So this woman had undoubtedly heard of Jesus and his work because of his popularity probably, and really was an evidence by the crowd that followed him everywhere he went. Now, we don't know what crowd actually made it into Gentile territory. But this lady knew what was going on.
Yeah, and possibly the crowd was more than likely made up of Gentiles. Like we said, a lot of Jews would not even go into that territory. So this may be a crowd that had heard about Jesus and being in Israel, and heard a little bit about him, and maybe that's where this woman heard about his miracles and so forth. But she came, and very interestingly enough, she seems to know a lot about him. So she uses the words or the name Lord first of all, and then says Son of David. And of course, that in itself was prophetic, because that was a promise that to David that he would one day rule, or his whole dynasty would rule the land of Israel forever. And of course, the last one that did that was Solomon.
Right.
And then Solomon's two sons got in a fight, and that's what split the country. But but she seems to know a lot about the Jewish religion. And again, maybe she's had been looking at what was going on, but she comes to him with a definite problem. She has a child, a young girl, who she says is demon possessed. Now, most people I've told know that I teach school. Sometimes I can understand what that might be like, But the idea is, she knows this, and of course, demon possession was something that was quite prominent in that era of time. And because as Christ was sent to the world to save the world, you can bet that Satan sent his armies to try to destroy the world at the same time. So there was a lot of that. We know Jesus cast demons out several times in the New Testament. So in any event, the Canaanites were an ancient people who actually had settled into this area before even the Jews came back in the Exodus to Israel. So the Canaanites were there, and as I said, in that northern part of the Galilee, and they were supposed to be run out, but the tribe didn't do it. So that's why they were causing trouble. So their descendants became known as the Phoenicians,
Yep.
and they were great sailors. They had, the country and their cities were on the coastline of the Mediterranean, and they sailed, all over the Mediterranean Sea. So, that tells you a little bit about them, and I'd like to maybe tie in something that's going on today with that. The fact that with the war going on between Israel and Hamas and all the terrorist people over there, and the Palestinians, we even here in our country, protests for Palestine, giving back their land. Well, what most people don't realize is that land was never theirs.
Right. The
land of Israel was never settled and owned by the Palestinians. In fact, the Palestinians have never had a country of their own. That was just a name that an ancient king gave the people, and they've never been a nation or anything like that. And so we find out that they're trying to make claims that they should have some of the land. And when they go back now, they're showing that they're trying to say Israel never had anything on the land, that they were there before Israel was. That's kind of a chant that they're saying. So, and a lot of people don't realize that this is Israel's land ever since Genesis, when God gave it to them. Yeah. So this is not a Palestinian issue. And when they talk about that, getting peace for if they would just let them have a two-state solution, they call it. That's not going to happen, because it's God's land to give, and that's what, again, a lot of people, because they don't know the Bible, they don't understand that.
Yeah, that's a real good explanation as to what's going on over there. And, talking about this Canaanite woman here, Coach, she really had two strikes against her. First of all, she was a Gentile, and of course a Gentile is anybody other than a Jew.
Right.
And she was a woman. Mm-hmm. And in that culture, in that era, a woman was a second-class citizen. Right. So she was deemed really unclean to a Jewish person, which makes this even more dramatic here, this encounter that she's going to have with Jesus, because despite her Gentile status, she came and knelt before a Jew and repeatedly asked for help. And we're going to see she's not going to give up when she's met with silence. But
right.
It talks about demon possession here.
Right.
And demon possession's a real thing.
Yes,
Coach.
absolutely.
People don't really realize that. And back in this culture, in this era again, there was no dispute. Mm-hmm. There was no debate as to whether there were demon-possessed people or not. No. It just was. They knew it for a fact. And a lot of the examples of that were drastic personality. Listen to these examples. Drastic personality change, supernatural strength, violent actions, illness, being mute or deaf, and doing intentional harm to yourself. Mm-hmm. And our culture today, our society today, is full of that type of activity, and it goes unnoticed.
Right.
That tells you something about our society today, that there are demon possessions in people today, and our society doesn't even realize it.
Doesn't even recognize it. Right.
But it was very, very well known back at this time. So that's what's going on with this lady's daughter. She's there begging Jesus for help. Yeah. All right, let's go to verse 20.
One last thing I'll add is she would be the last person in that country you would expect to recognize Jesus as the son of David.
Right.
Something you wouldn't expect from her.
Yep. All right, verse 23. Jesus did not answer a word. So his disciples came to him and urged him, "Send her away, for she keeps crying out after us." So it's interesting that Jesus would come into a Gentile territory and then not respond to a Gentile woman who was looking for help.
Yeah, we need to understand that the fact that her daughter was demon-possessed meant that she was her caretaker. We don't know how severe it was or anything, but that she would have had to spend a lot of time taking care of that daughter. So she was her caretaker. And when she asked about, this, and Jesus doesn't answer a word, apparently from what we see, she kept after it and probably begging him to do something. Finally, the disciples apparently got tired of it. They wanted her, and he had every right to send her away.
Oh yeah.
Being a rabbi, you just, as you mentioned earlier, first of all, she's not a Jew, and secondly, she's a woman, and you wouldn't see many women that would approach a rabbi like that with that kind of insistence that he come and because the way she put it, it was like you have to do this, for more for me than even my daughter, because I can't take it anymore. Seems like she's kind of at that point right now. So, so it does seem kind of strange that Jesus didn't say anything, but apparently she kept after it and kept after it.
Well, there's a lot of speculation as to why that is. First of all, Coach, did you notice that she addressed him as Lord? And his disciples didn't even do that, which I thought was very, very interesting. But a lot of scholars believe him ignoring this first plea from her was really intentional. Yeah. And there was some hidden meaning there that was really for the disciples as much as anybody else, because it wasn't the time for his message to go to the Gentiles yet. Right. So his hesitation here was intentional, a lot of scholars believe. Of course, he is going to take his message to this Canaanite woman here in just a moment. But he felt, everybody believes that they felt if he responded too quickly that he would be viewed as a Gentile lover, and then he would lose the Jews. Right. They would say, he just loves the Gentiles.
He's going to the other side.
Yeah, that's right. But so he wants to maintain that integrity with the Jewish followers first, because he knows the message is to go to the Jews and then to the Gentiles, and like the scripture said, actually the Jews are to be a light unto the Gentiles, and that's kind of the idea here. So it's not kind of the delay is it's just not quite time. It's like when the miracle when Jesus turned the water into wine. Right. That was his own mother requesting that, and he told her, "My time has not yet come." Yeah. And this is a similar situation here.
Right, and this too may just be a test of this woman's faith.
That too.
Will she back down now and go away, or will she continue to try to get her point across? So, and again, everything we're going to hear during this communication, whether he's talking to her or to the disciples, it's for all of them that are there. The message is.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the point he's making here. And I think the delay piece just added to that. Yeah. All right, let's go to verse 24. He answered, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel." So Jesus did not send the woman away like his disciples requested.
No, and we hear him make a strange statement, Well, when they said, he says, I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel.
Yep.
And again, making reference to the fact that he was to be sent and preach to the Jews first, the Greeks later, or the Gentiles later. And so that's the answer he gave. And so we're not sure even who he's talking to here.
Everybody.
Everybody, that right, but he wants everybody to hear this because he's got a point to make. And so if his answer was directed at the disciples, he was reminding them about what his true full mission was. They knew he was coming to everybody. They didn't think he was just going to stop with the Jews. And if it's to the woman, he's kind of saying, yeah, I'm really not, it's not, as you said, not time for me to do this, but he gave her some hope that he would help her, So, he was the son of David, he was the Messiah, and, this Canaanite woman knew that's who he was. There was no doubt, but just by the way that she addressed him. And these people were, like he described them, they were like sheep without a shepherd, the Jewish people, and they still didn't know it, especially the Jewish leaders. And the mission was first revealed to the people of Israel, which is what Scripture had demanded that he do that. And of course he did. And then God's blessing would be offered to them first. And then, as we said, they were to then extend that to the whole world eventually. But they had a hard time getting that across to everybody.
Well, everybody, especially today, Coach, knows that Jesus came and died for the sins of all mankind,
right.
Not black, not white, not
right.
Jew, not Gentile. But Jesus is at a point in his earthly ministry here where he needs to accomplish some things with the Jewish people first. And that's not quite yet completed.
Right.
So that's kind of what he's referring to. And that takes us to our next section here, and that is actually verses 25 through 28, and it's going to be talking about bread for the faithful, and this bread's going to have an interesting twist to it here, Coach.
Yeah.
Verse 25 and 26. The woman came and knelt before him. Lord, help me, she said. He replied, it is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to the dogs. So the woman did not debate Jesus' direction on his mission here.
No, and this lady, the more you read about her, the more impressed you are with her, and how smart she is about these things. And so, because we see that she didn't argue with him about what he said, and you kind of got to dig here a little bit to figure out what he was meaning by all this, because we know his reference here to children, and he's got reference to the dogs, and he's talking about feeding, and he says that it's not right to take children's bread and toss it to the dogs. So in essence, what he's talking about here is the blessings that God has given to his people, the Jews. They expect those blessings. First of all, this Canaanite woman is not a Jew.
Right.
And she is not under that covenant with God. So I think he's talking to not only the woman, but to his disciples and anybody else that's there too. And he's saying that, this is what should be the Jews' blessings first. And then, we'll take care of others. And his statement here is that I'm not going to take what's blessings are away from my people, that's the children of Israel, and give it to the dog, which, yes, he is calling her people dogs.
Yep.
But the thing is, she doesn't react to that part. She seems to be willing to accept that name, knowing that she is not Jewish, and she has no right to beg for this, the blessings of the Jews. But, that's just his way of again, talking to all of them, disciples and her and anybody else that might be in earshot, that, there's something coming for the Gentiles, but as we said, it's just not quite time yet.
Yeah.
But it gives her some hope because she doesn't back away from it. She shows her, dedication to her purpose here.
Well, that's a good point, because Jesus often spoke about the persistence of prayer to God, and here he's experiencing it firsthand.
Right.
Because this mother knew what she wanted, and that was consistent with the will of God. All she had to do was ask him, and she did. And it's really interesting here. You were talking about he referred to the Gentiles, or her people, the peoples that she's associated with, as dogs. And if you go back to the original language, back to the Greek language, and when it talks about dog, it's a different word.
Right.
And that word really means little dog, which has a little different meaning to it. Little dog was the family pet.
Right.
And which was, a pet was part of the family. And it wasn't like the dogs roaming the streets. It was actually family members,
Right.
the pet of the family. And that brings a little different twist to it, because they were an important piece of the family unit. But it wasn't a wild dog that would devour anything out on the streets that got
Right.
free or got loose. So that's a really interesting piece of that. And we'll talk more about that here in a minute. But that takes us to that first question, and that is, how long should we persist in prayer if God doesn't seem to be answering? And this lady's persistent.
Yes, she is.
For sure.
I think the first answer that you would go to with that, just you persist as long as it takes.
Yeah, that's right.
But sometimes, and I think Jesus is doing a little bit of that with this woman. God tests how strong our faith is. We go to God with this request. And I think God sometimes wants to know, how bad do we really want it? So he may put some stumbling blocks in there to keep us being able to get what we're asking for. But he still wants us to keep praying for it. He still wants us to be asking in faith that he will do that. It's more about, what do we really believe that God will do this if we ask it?
Right.
And and then finally, sometimes if we're not in God's will, if it's not in the will of God, whatever we're asking, he will show us, a reason to back off. It'll come different ways, but we need to understand that if you think it's something that you really need and you really want and are persistent about it, then if it is God's will, and you feel it's God's will, and he seems to not be saying, no, you can't have this, then it is up to you to be persistent, to show him how much you want it and how strong your faith is that he can deliver.
Yeah, when you look at this, you figure out, okay, why should I remain persistent in my prayer? I've got 4 really good bullet points here, and you've already probably touched on a couple of them, Coach. But first of all, the very first reason is persistent prayer focuses your attention. Because when you're being persistent with prayer, first of all, you don't need to remind God.
Right.
God knows, he doesn't need reminded. When you request something over and over again, it's not because he needs reminded, but it's to remind us that God is the source of the answer to our needs. Right. So persistent prayer focuses our attention. The second thing is, persistent prayer really clarifies our request. It makes sure that we really know what we do need to be requesting, that our hearts are pure, so that we are within God's will when he does answer that prayer. It's not that God doesn't want to answer our prayers, because he does. It's just that he wants to be certain of what we really want.
Right.
So that's number 2. And the third one is, and you already mentioned this, persistent prayer tests our faith. It really truly does. And it really is with this lady, this Canaanite woman here. In a sense, she's kind of praying. She's talking directly to Jesus. Right. So it's kind of like that. But one of the ways God tests our faith is by delaying some answers, which he's doing here. And then the fourth thing is, persistent prayer actually, Coach, it prepares your heart for the answer when it finally does come. And when you make a request to God, God almost always wants to answer in a much greater way than even what we asked.
Right.
So he wants to make sure that our hearts are pure and ready to receive that answer.
Right.
So those are just some thoughts as to why we should be persistent. But if you're out there and you're praying about something, there's only three answers to prayer, and you've talked about that a lot, and that's yes, no, and wait.
Right.
And figure out which one of those things it is, and if it's wait, then be persistent with your prayer.
Right.
And that takes us to verse 27, and it says this: "Yes, it is, Lord," she said. "Even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from their master's table." So the Gentile woman accepted that Jesus was sent just for Israel at this time.
Yes, but you look at the reply that she gave is really kind of neat coming from
really.
from her. You know, it's like she's saying, you know, Jesus told her this thing about the dogs and the crumbs and stuff, and she says, "But yeah, even the dogs get to eat the crumbs that the kids drop."
Pretty clever, really.
It really was, you know. So in other words, she's saying, "I'm not asking for much here, you know. And I understand the situation that you are in, and you are the kid, you know, you are the Messiah." I think she knows, and but she says, "Can't you find a few crumbs for me?" You know, is kind of what she's asking here, I think. But she says that even the dogs eat the crumbs. You know, and she's now lowering herself, realizing that, yeah, I am a dog to you. You know, I'm humbling myself. She can't get much more humble than what she is with him right now. But yet at the same time, she's got this wit about her that kind of lets him know that she understands what he's saying, and she's not holding it against him. She's ready to take his whatever he says. But here, you know, it makes him realize that she understands what he's doing and what he's saying. And I think she understands it's not just for her, that he is talking to the disciples at the same time. So, like I said, I'm just, the more I hear this lady, the more admiring I am of her and how she talks to Jesus through this.
Well, first of all, she trusted in the Lord's power.
Right.
Even though she was a Jew, she trusted in God's goodness and His power. And second of all, she kept pleading for the Lord's help, because she never doubted that the Lord's ability to cast the demon out of her daughter existed. She knew that He could do that. And again, she made that analogy of the dogs, and she accepted that. And the woman notices that Jesus uses the word not for stray dogs that wander the streets, but for household pets. And pets are insiders. They're not outsiders. And they not only belong to the family as like livestock do, but they are part of the family, like livestock are not.
Right.
So it's really a neat thing. So she not only believes that Jesus can heal her daughter, she believes that He will heal her daughter, and she's going to be right. We're going to find out.
Yeah, and besides, I think she's telling Jesus, you know, I'll take what the Jews don't want. You know, I'm just asking for crumbs here.
All right, and that takes us to our next question, and that is, if Christ died for all, why are only some saved? And I bet there's a lot of people who would like to be able to answer that question.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of people on the side that are not saved that, you know, maybe kind of wonder. But the first thing is, everyone needs to understand that the offer of salvation is for everyone, no matter who. And it doesn't matter, Jew, Gentile, or anyone else from any other culture. It's still open to you, and it always will be until that last time that you take your last breath. And so people need to understand that. And because God tells us, it says in Scripture, it's God's will that none should perish. That's His will. He wants everyone saved. You know, the idea here is that people, however, God in His loving person gives everybody free will. And it's their choice. It's not because God doesn't want them to be saved. It's because they don't want to be saved. Right. And that's the problem. We have too many people that are being persuaded so many wrong things today through this culture and all this stuff that people are not sure they want to be saved. but they're not hearing the whole story. They're not getting into the scripture and understand that they're going to definitely regret one of these days if they don't. But the thing about God is that God loves everybody. He loves those that are saved. He loves those that are not saved even, and he's not going to make any unsaved person spend eternity with him if they don't want to.
Yep.
He's not going to drag them into heaven. So they spend their whole life down here saying, I don't want you, God. Well, he's not going to make them spend eternity with him if they don't want that.
Yeah. And that's unfortunate.
It is.
While salvation is a free gift from God, it must be received to become our own.
Right.
And imagine, it's like this, Coach. Imagine a friend who wants to give you a gift. And first they go and they purchase it, they buy it, and they paid the price for it to get it. And then they offer it to you, and it's been fully paid for. Mm-hmm. And so what must you do? Well, to receive it, to make your own, you have to accept it.
Right.
Until you do, the gift isn't really truly yours. That's how God's gift of salvation works. Mm-hmm. God's gift of salvation is a gift already paid for, and the person that paid for that was Jesus Christ. He paid for that on the cross.
Right.
So he took it on himself, and he took upon himself our sins, enduring the divine judgment that came down because of that we deserved. Right. He took our place for that. So now he offers salvation to us freely, but we must open our hearts and lives to him and receive it.
Right.
It's that free gift. So while Christ's sacrifice covers all, the act of acceptance is essential in this equation.
Right. And the other thing people need to realize too is that if you truly want the gift, it would be like somebody giving you something useful that you want to use, that you need, and then not only do you accept that gift, but you have to actually use that gift. Uh-huh. And it's not that you have to do any works with it, but it should become from you as fruit. The Bible calls it, because if you don't, produce any fruit from the gift that God gave you, it's going to waste. You may be saved, but you can do so much more. So not only do we have to accept it, but we have to use it then to produce fruit in God's kingdom.
Yeah. And that takes us to our last verse here today, and it says this: Then Jesus said to her, Woman, you have great faith. Your request is granted. And her daughter was healed at that moment. So rarely do we read in Matthew's gospel, Coach, of instances when Jesus publicly commended someone for their faith.
Yeah, and that we've actually seen it now in the last couple lessons. That not only the woman gets commended by Christ, but so did the centurion. Last time we saw the same thing. Jesus told him his faith, I haven't seen faith like this anywhere in Israel.
Yep.
Yeah, so we see both of these last couple lessons coming into play here. But the woman's behavior revealed through her persistence her great faith. And he knew that she was everything was coming from her heart. And the fact that she was persistent, we know that she believed that he could do what she needed done. So that's her faith showing right there. And the persistence just showed him how much she wanted it. So we see that coming from both parts. But we find out that, you start thinking, I wonder how many blessings we miss because we're not persistent in following what God says. So, a life of great faith requires confidence that God not only can, but will grant whatever prayer that you're asking for. And she had no doubt that he would do that. And then like the centurion, here we see again another place where Jesus heals from a distance.
Yep. Especially with the Gentiles.
Exactly, with Gentiles here. So if the disciples haven't got the message yet, they ought to be at least waking them up a little bit. Hey, this is not like it's been. We're looking into a new phase of things here.
Yeah, and as we have been studying faith in and of itself for several months and weeks, Coach, this is a great illustration of what faith really is.
Yeah.
And the full promise of this incident won't be really completed until the resurrection of Jesus Christ.
Right.
But one thing this definitely does is this props the door open to the Gentiles.
Right.
And that's kind of what he's doing here.
Yeah.
And that takes us to our last question here today, and that is, what would you say if a person tells you, I do not have enough faith to come to Jesus?
That's kind of a loaded question, but
yes, it is.
I think if it were me, I would, first thing I would ask is, why don't you believe? Why don't you have enough faith? What is it that's keeping you from having faith in the Bible, having faith in, do you believe in God? Do you believe in the Bible? We need to start out there, I think, with people, and then we go into, as we have seen and been told in almost every lesson for the past couple of months, we have to be in this position we call about defending your faith. You have to be able to and be willing to defend your faith. And what that is constituted by simply, you need to know what you believe, you need to know why you believe it, and then you need to know how to communicate that to people. That's what witnessing is all about, or that's what defending your faith is all about. And it's, if someone said to me that, I would assume they would be an atheist that would be saying, I don't have enough faith to be a Christian. I think I would end up by saying, I don't have enough faith to be an atheist.
Yeah, that's right.
But you try to convince them through evidence, and that's just it. You can take them through evidence in the Bible, where there's plenty of evidence to show that what happened to Christ, his resurrection, is well documented. And there's no doubt about that. And so you just try to knock down some of the things that they don't believe in, because they're hearing all things today, So it's not easy defending your faith anymore. You've got to be able to defend a lot of things.
Well, when someone says, I don't have enough faith to come to Jesus, that's a profound statement.
Sure.
And it really is a symptom of lack of belief and doubt. Mm-hmm. And when somebody says they lack enough faith to come to Jesus, we can respond in several different ways. One way is we can be empathetic with them. Mm-hmm. We can tell them that, and we can encourage them, and we can acknowledge their struggle. But the best thing we can do is the stuff that you mentioned, in addition to that and this, the best thing we can do is just point them to Jesus.
Right.
That really is all we can do. I mean, that's the easiest way to do it. Debating them is pretty tough.
Yeah. But, like I said, I think we need to have something ready to at least give them something to think about.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
And you don't have to get into debate with them. You don't have to know everything, but you do have to be willing to tell them what you believe and why.
Yep.
Well,
yeah, you can't debate you can't debate what I believe, and vice versa. So when you tell them how you feel and believe, that's not debatable. Right. So that's good. And that takes us to our thought to remember, and that is this: to find truth, look to Jesus Christ. And Coach, could you take this thought to remember and give us some final thoughts as we wrap it up here today?
Well, I think one of the things that you can take from this is the fact that here is, as we said, probably the least type of person you would ever expect to do what she did. Coming to not only a Jewish rabbi, but the Messiah himself with this prayer and asking him to heal her daughter. And I still think it was a little bit selfish on her part, because I think she was just kind of tired of being the caregiver.
It might be.
Because you get to that point. That's a hard thing to do. And but she approaches him, and then she showed how persistent she could be, and showed that was her faith basis for her faith that she had, that Jesus could do what he said he would do. And she was very well schooled in the Jewish philosophy, so to speak, of their religion, because she knew what he was saying when he mentioned the dogs and the scraps.
Yeah.
She was right on line with him. She knew. So she had well prepared, I think, herself to approach the Jesus, and so I think she knew that he was the truth. There wasn't any doubt in her mind, and so knowing the truth, then she knew where to look, and that was to go to Christ himself. And a lot of people need to realize too that they need to keep in mind that even if they're not looking for Christ, he's still looking for them.
Yeah.
And that's what she knew.
Well, and that's a good spot to end on right there. And we began this segment with the thought of, have you ever heard the term, this is just plain out going to the dogs?
Yeah.
And I think we've all heard that term in our lives. And what does the Bible have to say about that, and what does it mean? Well, in today's narrative, the gospel message literally went to the dogs, which the dogs was a term for the Gentiles.
Right.
And it's been going to the dogs ever since,
Right.
Which is really, really a neat thing. And if you have any questions about that, we would love to hear from you. This is Pine Grove Baptist Church in Parkersburg, West Virginia, and you should see the contact information on the screen. And if you have any questions about anything, we would love to hear from you. For those of you who watch week to week, or maybe this is your very first time, we would encourage you to share this message with your friends and your contacts out on whatever social media platform it is that you subscribe to. It just gets the word out. We thank each one of you for watching week to week. We don't take it for granted, and we do see it as a very, very dear privilege. Next week, the title of our study is Justified by Faith, and we're going to be in the book of Romans next week. So until next time, this is Mike Cornell along with Coach Ron Lathey and our production team, Andy and Courtney Holbrook, wishing everybody have a blessed week, and we hope to see you real soon.